I've been trying to avoid this topic on this show. Well, at least trying to avoid going super in depth with it. Mainly because I didn't have a good way to approach it. But thanks to a pretty good MCU show and a brilliant YouTuber, I've found my angle. Today's video is brought to you by CinemaWins, She-Hulk Attorney at Law, and Incels. Relation versus representation. Now, I will be the first person to step up and say, if you need to relate to enjoy something, you probably lack imagination. Anytime I hear someone say they don't like something only because they can't relate, I honestly look down on them. Though the words are related, that's not what representation is actually about. Representation is about an image. It's about an outlook on life. It is completely removed from whether something is fictional or non-fictional. All media has an agenda. Art is not excluded. That being said, there is a very pressing discussion going on today in media. Because I'm so interested in the MCU, we'll use that as our lens. Into CinemaWins. CinemaWins came about as one of many responses to the channel CinemaSins. But instead of just stealing their format, CinemaWins decided to talk mainly about the good things about movies. It was absolutely refreshing. He isn't really as critical as some of the other video essayists that talk about movies. It seems his goal is to just push positivity. But the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Okay, I'm exaggerating, that's a little dramatic. But impact is more important than intention. He recently did a video on Captain Marvel. Now, CinemaWins is someone that people may call an ally.
If you're someone who hated this movie simply because it had a female lead, please leave me a comment and let me know why. I am super interested to hear from someone with your enlightened perspective.
He shows empathy and compassion for many different people. Particularly important to this conversation, those who have a bit of a hard time in this country historically.
Fanboys and fangirls can suck sometimes. And when they get angry, they try to cause pain and damage by reverting to attacks about gender, race, sexuality, all the things people just are and can't or wouldn't change about themselves. So if you've ever resorted to that, just don't attack ideas, not people, or don't even attack ideas, just discuss.
Understatement aside, the issue with allies and empathy is that there is a point where a situation will meet the edge of your ability to relate to the unrelatable, and in that instance, will you do harm or will you continue to help? Spoiler alert, in those instances, anything other than actively helping is hurting. So unless you have been living under a rock, there was major backlash with the announcement of Captain Marvel. A popular opinion, and one that I agree with, since I've seen evidence, is that a lot of fans hated that a woman was being put in this position. Lee, the creator of CinemaSins, claims that people didn't hate that it was a woman, but specifically that it was Brie.
All that said, one of the more annoying things to come out of this controversy was the idea that men can't handle a female superhero or lead. It's a straw man argument at best, inflammatory at worst.
His reasoning is the combination that he hadn't seen anybody complain about it being a woman.
Comment sections catch the dregs of society, and out of 3,400 comments, if there was one comment about not liking her because she's a her, I didn't see it.
That other movies didn't have that backlash, and that Brie Larson pissed people off. Okay, first of all,
the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence.
That's just a fact. Just logically speaking, it is much harder to prove the existence of something than it is to prove its non-existence. I would hope that anyone who made it this far is arguing in good faith if they are either on the fence or on the other side of this than I am. Outside of just literally not being able to be everywhere, there could be dog whistles that you simply would never catch. There are certain ways that certain groups speak that only the clued in would understand. The clued in sometimes include those who are the targets of the barbs. I'll give you an example about black people, because when someone brings up, unprompted, how well-spoken a black person is, that's a dog whistle. Is it in every instance intended to be an insult? Of course not. But that urge to comment on how well a Black person speaks comes from an image or a certain representation that exists about Black people. But people didn't complain about other movies featuring women in prominent roles. Well, Lee mentions a bunch of other movies with women in them.
Gamora is pretty unlikable and pompous in the first Guardians, but no one had a problem with her. In fact, Black Widow's character for Iron Man 2 is basically be better at things than men, and everyone loved her. No one complained about Wasp, who I mentioned in that video was the most capable hero in that movie. Alita, Underworld, Hannah, Resident Evil, Alien, Aliens, Hunger Games, Atomic Blonde, Kill Bill, Edge of Tomorrow.
Some aren't women in the main protagonist spot, so they aren't a comparison. Some were released before modern social media, so there would be no real way to compare them either. We're also ignoring the necessity to watch that Marvel has created with the MCU in some cases. The two examples that Lee uses as movies that released around the same time as Captain Marvel are Wonder Woman and Alita Battle Angel. The biggest, most simple, and sufficient reason to explain why this did not happen to Wonder Woman is that the person and the mantle are the original incarnations. Surely, nobody arguing in good faith believes that disliking a group means that you will never have anything to do with any individual from this group, right? Like, we all know there are straight men that have assaulted for the purposes of intercourse women and have been in consensual relationships with women too, right? He also adds a caveat to the Wonder Woman claim.
And also the zero backlash Wonder Woman got besides some crazy outliers.
More outliers than Captain Marvel? Because he said he didn't see any. But let's move on to Alita Battle Angel.
Same time, ignoring the exactly zero backlash Alita Battle Angel was getting at the same time.
It's interesting that he brought up this movie, but completely failed to talk about the controversy attached to it. And no, I'm not talking about the whitewashing one. See, it's a common practice to not admit or to defend yourself when accused of something that people deem bad. Most people don't really have the urge to admit to being a bigot. Prime example, when news of Carol Danvers being the focus of the movie dropped, people were coming out of the woodwork complaining and asking why it couldn't be Marvel, aka the male version. Later, after people started calling them out for misogyny, they started saying it would be fine if it was Spectrum or Photon. That's Monica Rambeau for those who didn't know. And if you didn't know, I don't blame you. I honestly don't believe most of them knew either. They probably just did a quick Google search. The reason I say that is because Monica's comics have historically done horribly financially. Now, I haven't proven anything with what I just said. But ask yourself, which is more likely? A bunch of fans of this relatively obscure character came out of nowhere, or a bunch of people who didn't like their superhero being replaced by a girl needed a way to throw off the scent of their misogyny. Mind you, this was happening almost 2 years before Brie was even involved. Back to Alita Battle Angel. When Captain Marvel was set to drop, the nonprofit We Have Stories launched a campaign to fund underprivileged children to go see the movie. They had previously done this successfully for Black Panther. The hashtag was Captain Marvel Challenge. When certain people saw that, they commenced to attack and troll that organization and its owner. After Alita came out, those same people decided to co-opt the campaign and send people to see that movie instead with the Alita Battle Angel Challenge. Among these people was a news correspondent who had recently tweeted and deleted that he had seen Alita, he fell asleep halfway through, and that it was a boring mess. To be clear, this controversy with Alita does not prove that people didn't like Captain Marvel because she was a woman. What it proves is that even if it was just because of Brie, those people are shitty enough to attack a nonprofit that helps children. It also proves that maybe Lee is unknowingly inflating how much people liked that movie. Now let's get to Brie. I'm not making the argument that nobody disliked the movie because they disliked Brie. but I've covered this already in my Listen to the Fans video. So I'll speed through this one. What Brie said wasn't wrong. To sum up her point, which only gets misconstrued if you aren't actually listening to what she said and instead are trying to read into it, she didn't care what a bunch of over 40 white men had to say about A Wrinkle in Time because they were clearly not the target audience. That's it. That's a fact. Lee says,
the idea that all white dude critics have the same perspective is silly, and reducing people who aren't white dudes to just being represented by their race or gender is also pretty icky.
Remember what I was saying about allyship earlier? The issue with Lee's take here is that since he's reached the end of his empathy, he's interpreting what Brie is saying instead of just listening. Brie is not saying that all white dude critics have the same singular perspective. What she is saying is that they all share a couple of many potential perspectives. They are all white, so they share that. They are all male, they share that. They are all over 40, they share that. Missing from those perspectives? The female perspective, the young person perspective, the person of color perspective. Are any of those perspectives monolithic? Of course not. But are there some things about being a woman that I could never really know firsthand? Of course. That's the point. I could only ever empathize with the woman perspective. At the end of that empathy, I choose to listen instead of trying to make the connections myself based on my limited perspective. Like, seriously, even with these videos, when I talk about things that are outside of the perspectives that I live in, I always survey people who do live in said perspectives. I literally delayed releasing the No Way Home video because I was waiting for a couple women to check it so that, they can make sure I didn't say something that was completely out of line.
Like I said in Black Panther, young girls of color can relate to Thor's contentious relationship with his brother just as well as a flesh and blood Norse god. I, a white dude, teared up in theaters watching Carol Through the Ages standing back up.
Here's the thing. This is that imagination that I was speaking about earlier. Depending on who you are, you don't always necessarily pick up on those commonalities, at least not automatically. And in that case, you would be trying to find something to relate to. What representation done right fixes is that need to try and find. So when the majority of these people who Lee claims just don't like Brie see things not being as automatic for them anymore, maybe it's possible that some of them don't take it so well.
It's just, when you hear Agent Coulson call comic book fans who don't like Brie butthurt, the comic fans that made Captain Marvel popular enough to turn into a movie?
Yeah, no. That's not what happened at all. Not the butthurt part, he absolutely did say that, and in my opinion, he was right. But if you look at these charts coming on the screen, you'll see that this comic was never really a hot seller. Every single spike on this graph for the books released before the movie was a thing is a relaunch, a tie-in, or variant covers. If you're familiar with comics, you'll know that these three scenarios will always cause a spike in sales. These trend fall percentages that you see, they are well below Marvel's average of 35%. Sales for the books were the best they had ever been after the movie was a thing. So that kills the idea that people were mad because Brie was playing a favorite character of theirs and they didn't like it. Wrapping this portion up, I don't want this misconstrued. I don't want this to seem like an attack on CinemaWins. Because if memory serves me, pretty much every other deeper dive that was inspired by a YouTuber was absolutely unapologetically an attack. In this case, I just think Lee is staying on brand and trying to push only positivity. The problem is when we act like everything is okay, people tend to get hurt. Out of all the videos I've done on other YouTubers, this is one I really wish I could get that YouTuber to watch. But to end this video, we'll move away from CinemaWins and address some of these fans. Ignoring the actual movements like Not My Thor and ignoring the recent revelation of several incels telling on themselves that they've never had sex and or they have never watched the Daredevil Netflix series or read the Daredevil comics when they called him unrelatable for having sex. Here are some comments I've seen from a single Facebook group about the MCU and mainly recently concluded show, She-Hulk Attorney at Law. Michael says, I remember reading She-Hulk in the early to mid 2000s, and I don't remember it being this pathetic. I've given each new Disney Plus series a chance, but 6 episodes in, I'm still trying to figure out what this thing is trying to be. Number 1, it's not a standard MCU show because she's a superhero whose arch enemy is social media. The only evil she's fighting against is the cult of personality and people trying to co-opt or destroy her brand. His misunderstanding of what cult of personality means aside, while there are many tropes in the MCU in general, I don't think enough of the shows thus far have been similar enough for there to be such thing as a standard MCU show. Number 2, it's not a legal show because the cases all deal with the most deplorable examples of humanity who have superpowers to match their horrid personalities. Nikki Ramos is the only character that gives me any hope because she can work around all aspects of Jennifer's life. His attempt to invalidate She-Hulk as a legal show, which it absolutely is, falls so flat he starts adding things in there that have nothing to do with it being a legal show. Number 3, it's not a rom-com because Walters is nigh invisible as dating or relationship material unless she's hulked out. One plot was literally her trying to reclaim a trademark name with her Tinder failures as evidence. Okay, I wouldn't call it a rom-com, but this explanation doesn't disqualify it from being one, mainly because it's not true. She literally ends the season in some type of relationship with Daredevil, eating at a family barbecue while she's Jen. But to be fair, he clearly hadn't reached the end of the show. Number 4, it's not a comedy, except the kind that mocks trendy internet personalities or reality TV. While I didn't want any Kardashian peanut butter in my Bridezilla chocolate, it's the unpalatable, obnoxious confection we were fed anyway. Yeah, no, it's 100% a comedy. This isn't something that could even be argued in good faith. You not finding something funny does not mean that the intention wasn't to be funny. Moving on to the next screenshot. Robert says, Rotten Tomatoes is highly liberal. A show that attempts to push female empowerment versus a show geared towards men. I mean, proof's in the pudding. Or politics, I get those confused. Yeah, so this comment is from a post that showed the critic Rotten Tomatoes scores of several recent shows, including the newest offerings from the Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones universes. Notice how he doesn't even attempt to critique the show. He's literally crying that a show with a female empowerment theme is preferred over a show geared towards men. Yeah. Timothy says, I may not share the feelings of all of you men out there, but we need to stand our ground and don't let women move into everything that we've got. Hulk was fine the way he was. Just think of all these other Marvel characters had counterparts. Y'all just enjoy that, then Hulk stands alone. And you kind of lost the plot at the end. But do I really have to say anything with this one? Nicholas, what? I feel they were just pushing an agenda. It was awful and way off. Here's this tired narrative. Agendas or politics or whatever you want to call it has always been a part of art. Magneto is literally a survivor of the Holocaust. The issue these kind of people have is that these particular politics don't help them. Either that or they're just stupid. Either way, this person was giving a rating for all of the MCU shows thus far. When he got to Falcon and Winter Soldier, he gave it a 7 out of 10. He says, it was a good show overall, but all the bullshit about race and the black struggle wokeism shit stopped me from enjoying it as much as the others. Yeah, see my last point. It's another one. This time it's about Ms. Marvel. Jeff says, it has nothing to do with the skin color of the actor and everything to do with the values that are being pushed. No one hated on Wonder Woman because it had good values. And Phil asks, what values of Ms. Marvel are being pushed that are not good in your opinion? I'm not going to read this one. Basically, he's saying Islam bad. And yeah, we'll just move forward. Beat It King Kane says, they're only attracting the LGBTQ. They have to connect with all their fans. Mind you, this is about Marvel. Someone responds and said, she's Muslim, not LGBTQ. He says, she has moms though that still connects. The same person said, no, that was America Chavez in Doctor Strange. OP says, I'm talking about the actor and she is in with LGBTQ. If you read up about it, you'll know. Ugh. More agenda talk, this time not even about what's going on in the series, but the actor who plays her. Patrick adds in, stop it. First they totally disappointed with Hulk, then Disney gave us non-binary Scar to boot. More bigotry. And now not even connecting it to anything. Just assuming it will be included somehow. Jay Scott says, I'm done after watching Multiverse of Madness. I don't mind strong women characters. I love them, actually. It's funny how every time someone complains about something, they always talk about how they love the thing they're about to complain about first.
But thanks to a pretty good MCU show and a brilliant YouTuber. The issue with Lee's take here is that since he's reached the end of his empathy, he's interpreting what Brie is saying instead of just listening.
I digress. But not when a movie thinks it needs to make the men out to be weak idiots. I see where it's going and I'm out. So I'm gonna ask him, are you mad about Multiverse of Madness because the Scarlet Witch is stronger than Doctor Strange? Scott says, no. I did not care for the fact that they introduced the Illuminati, 3 of which were men, that died almost immediately. They were obviously trying to make the women seem more powerful by making the men extremely weak. Not just Doctor Strange, all the characters. This is for the I don't like the movie because it didn't make sense. It has nothing to do with women crowd. Here he is clearly displaying a woman being stronger than men is nonsensical. Never mind that this character is clearly one of the strongest characters of all time. Never mind that the Illuminati are literally shown in this very movie underestimating her. Let's go to Texcellent Life. We can never have anything these days without some actor, artist, director, etc. trying to get political or push some agenda. Just write something good for entertainment's sake. Give us a break. For crying out loud, we get enough of all that BS shoved down our throats from every other media outlet. Do what movies and TV used to do and allow the viewer to escape reality for a bit. What movies and TV used to do? Okay, let's look at some of the biggest shows in the used to days. One of the top viewed shows of the 1950s in the United States is I Love Lucy. It was literally about female empowerment and women advancing in society. That sounds like an agenda. The show that reached the most homes in the 1960s, Beverly Hillbillies, was literally a caricature of white Southerners. Yeah. But beyond specific shows and movies like, The Matrix or Star Trek, there are countless tropes that introduce politics or agenda all the time. Interracial couples, minorities moving into the neighborhood or the workplace, workers' rights, sexual assault, etc.
So men weren't mad that there was a cocky woman in their comic book movie, they were mad Brie was in their comic book movie.
This last screenshot by Reeve, the caption says, calling it the MCU is sexist, and that's in quotes. And then there's a photoshopped picture with She-Hulk, Ironheart, Kate Bishop as Hawkeye, Captain Carter, Mighty Thor, and Yelena Belova. Now this screenshot is not from that same group. This was something I wasn't even looking for. It just randomly popped up on my timeline. There are literally, with a decent amount of consistency, people making things up blinded by their bigotry. As far as we know, Captain Carter and Mighty Thor don't even exist anymore. This photoshopped picture of characters introduced in Phase 4 deliberately and conveniently leaves out Shang-Chi, Billy and Tommy, the new Falcon, Namor, and Moon Knight. Not to mention those who are still left over or that have been announced like Daredevil, 3/4 of the Fantastic Four, Blade, etc. So that's it. What's my actual conclusion? While it's ridiculous to reduce all criticism of a particular MCU project to bigotry, it's equally as ridiculous to claim that none of it is. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll talk to you guys later.